So I'm joined today with Deirdre Carbery. Deirdre is an ex-Defence Force member. I think you served in the Defence Force for 15 years.
Yeah, just coming on 15 years. Yeah.
Okay. Do you miss the army now, or?
I do. I miss certain aspects of my military service. I think all the reasons I decided to join in the first place, the diversity and experiences, the opportunity to serve overseas. And I should probably say that, yes, the opportunity to serve overseas is probably one of the main drivers for me. I miss that because when you move out of the military, I guess unless you maybe go into like an NGO sector or, you join the UN as maybe a civilian, like you don't get those opportunities to travel to some of the most dangerous places in the world. And that, as strange as it might sound, that was definitely a push factor into the military for me. Doing something different. I always knew growing up I didn't want like a regular office job. I wanted something with excitement. I wanted something that was challenging, both physically and mentally. So I think now that I'm out nearly 3 years, probably the overseas aspect is what I miss most. But the people as well. I think there's something about, as well, like there's something about military service coming in as like a young recruit or a young cadet, and the ties and the bonds that you make and the really hard experiences that you have that shape you as an 18-year-old, and things that you think you'll never be able to get through, and you come out the other side and you just feel like you feel so confident, and you look around at the people that you've shared those experiences with, and some of them are going to be like friends for life. And I think that's something really special. I don't think you get that in all careers and all jobs or occupations. But I think it's something really unique about military service. So yeah, the people and the overseas experiences, I think, are my two things I miss. Yeah.
And I suppose, what was the thought process for you, like joining the Defence Forces? Like, was it like, did you play sports when you were younger, or was it like always on the horizon, or did you have like family member?
Yeah, so my dad served in the military. He was a colonel. He retired, at regular retirement age, and I was really lucky growing up. My mum was a primary school teacher. My dad was an army officer, and when I was quite young, myself and my brothers had an opportunity to travel overseas with my dad to Syria and Israel. And I remember at that time, like, there's some of my earliest memories of being surrounded by men at the time mostly, who were serving in the military, and who were just so proud of their service. And generally they had like long family histories as well of serving and serving their countries. And I remember just being really in awe of them, of the work they were doing. There was a huge culture around like fitness, outdoors, just physical activity in general. And my dad and my mum like shared that with us. So from the Middle East then, and moving back home and going to school, a lot of my friends, their fathers were in the military as well. So I think that kind of those early formative years and that socialization piece, it was a huge influencer on my life. What's interesting though is like neither of my two brothers had
no interest at all.
And I would say, they'll kill me for saying this, but like no aptitude either. Like they weren't.
You'll be in trouble.
Yeah, I was definitely like the more like physically robust, I guess. No, they'll disagree now, but at the time and kind of growing up as children, was really interested in physical training and fitness, team sports, individual sports, and I was really competitive as well. In everything I did, and I think that's maybe something we shouldn't shy away to in the military as well. Like, we are kind of competitive people. So when it came to making that decision at, I was thinking at like 15, 16, what am I going to go into? Actually, around that time, I started being exposed to women in the Defence Forces for the first time through colleagues of my dad. And I remember thinking, okay, wow, I've only ever really known military men. And here are these women who were, going out to work, wearing uniforms, holding like a diverse set of appointments within the military, be it in like training or logistics or transport. And through meeting them, I just remember going, wow, like this is really exciting. They're talking about like going shooting on the range. And then I'm seeing them at weekends and like they look so glamorous and so feminine. And I was like, oh, like this isn't just like a career for men. And I went to an all-girls school, and a career in the military wasn't pushed out at all. Like I didn't know anyone, any women really that had joined. It was never mentioned in like career guidance counselling sessions. And I think they probably don't realize, but like they definitely influenced me. So I knew at the age of 17 going into leaving cert what I didn't want in a career. And I think the army offered me, I guess, a pathway to the things I knew I did want. Like I wanted, as I said, like a challenge. I wanted a job that was kind of physical as well. I wanted the opportunity to travel the world. And going in as a cadet, I knew I'd have the opportunity as well at the time to go to college. After I completed my military training. So it seemed like a good career option at the time. And now in hindsight, I think it's a massive decision for like a 16, 17-year-old to make. But it was definitely the right one. And my parents didn't try and influence me too much. My dad was overseas. He was commanding a unit in Liberia at the time. I think he was secretly delighted. Really?
I was going to ask you, like, how did he feel about you?
He was really, really happy. I don't think my mum was. I think my mum was actually parked outside of the cadet school for the first like 2 months, ready for the call to collect me. Because like she knew, like it's a tough. It is a really, really tough job, and there's those training years, those formative years, be it going in as a recruit for 6 months, training, or like the cadetship for my time was 21 months. Physically, it was really, really, really demanding. It was really tough. Mentally, it was really tough. There was a lot of tears shed, particularly in the first few months, till I really found myself like comfortable in it, until I really figured out is this for me? I mean, am I actually able for it? And I think through those like 21 months, I started to figure out like, yes, I am. I mean, I definitely doubted myself, but coming out the end of it and getting commissioned and going to my first unit, the 5th Infantry Battalion in Dublin, I knew then it was kind of the right choice. And I look back and I was really happy with coming through those hard times.
There's different avenues obviously you can enter through the Defence Forces. The most popular I think is either enlisted or go in as a cadet and down the commission route. What did you have to do during the application stages to become a cadet essentially?
So at my time there was like an initial screening, and I considered both options, about the enlisted route and going in as a cadet, because I think they both offer kind of unique benefits, and kind of diverse experiences as well within both options. And I decided, because I guess at the age I was, and I really thought of the army as well as like a long-term career, and I wanted to kind of go in the early stages like that, I guess, like manager route, which would have been the cadets at the time. And just see if I was suited to it. So I had like initial screenings, like there was your medical, your fitness test. They were all fine, and then there was I think it was 2 or 3 interviews, which were hard. It was competency-based interviews, and I guess at the age of 18, like you're trying to bring forward like all these like limited life experiences, but really showcase why you should be considered as a future leader in the Defence Forces. And I was lucky at the time, and I think this is for young people as well that are maybe considering a career in the military. Like no experiences are, should be maybe,
they're undervalued maybe.
It should be undervalued. Like everything from volunteering to getting involved in sports, community-based projects, just I guess like helping out, putting yourself out there. And I hope this isn't the case, but I know COVID, like a lot of those initiatives might have paused for a time, community-based programs, initiatives, volunteering opportunities. But what I would say is like, again, demonstrating that leadership, like, step forward and step up and put yourself out there. Because it was through those and showcasing those experiences, I think that ultimately then I was successful then in getting a place in that cadet class. it was competitive at the time. We had quite a large class. There was about 75 of us between Army, Navy and Air Corps.
Okay.
So our Army class was about 55 people, 12 of whom were women, which was one of the largest cadet classes for females. So it felt like we had a nice cohort of women there as well. And a good mix, I think, in terms of like geographical spread and people with different backgrounds and experiences. It was it was an interesting place to be in for the 21 months.
Do you remember your first day actually?
Yeah. I do.
How was that?
Terrifying. Like absolutely terrifying. You're wearing a suit.
Okay.
You're going into this alien environment. I remember basing everything I knew in the Army off my dad as well. My dad never shouted.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time like being shouted at and being told to like do press ups, and it was in that first day or two.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, like my dad doesn't shout. What is going on here? I thought everyone was like quietly, spoken, and it was all very, not as intense maybe as I thought. And very quickly you realized, okay, yes, you were not at home. You were no longer relying on your parents. This is all on you. And that was hard. I did definitely cry the first night. And it was, I just turned 18, and you're in the Curragh. I wasn't a million miles from home. I grew up in Naas in County Kildare.
Not too bad. Sneak home at the weekends.
But yeah. Did I?
You definitely did.
But it was just completely different to, your normal home comforts.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think that's something we should shy away from. I think that is the purpose of military training. You're trying to, I don't want to say break a person, but certainly break a person down. And I now know why. Like, the challenges we face when we're overseas or in a conflict environment, or where we're in that life or death situation, like you have to have built up the skills and experience and knowledge, and most importantly, I think the resilience to be able to like confidently operate in that environment and make quick decisions, like be decisive, and showcase, I guess, that leadership. So now I understand why training was so difficult. But that's what I suppose that's what I attribute like a lot of like the reasons why I am where I am now is down to that training and those early few months.
And it's 20, the cadetship was 21 months
at the time.
then,
Yeah,
right?
I think it's 15 now, so a little bit shorter. A little bit more structured. I think they're looking at an older age profile in terms of cadets as well. But I think it, again, for me, the diversity aspect is important. I think like diversity in terms of age and sex and background and culture and is really important, I think, in a cadet class. Like we need to be a reflection of the society that we're serving. And while that's really important in terms of at-home operations and domestic operations, I think when we're overseas, that becomes even more important. You don't want this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to protecting people, providing safety and security. So I think continuing to promote diversity in terms of how the Defence Forces hires people is really, really important.
Okay, and then so you're done the 21 months. Any highlights then from training, like particular standout moments during like the 21
It's a bit of
phase?
a blur.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Hard. Yeah, I would describe it. I don't think I could, definitely not at my age now, but I don't think I could go back and do it. That's not to say I'm not really, really proud of what was achieved during it. But I do remember the physicality aspect was quite hard and kind of relentless. So, if anyone is thinking about a career in the military, I would say to be realistic, like you have to be quite, and I was quite like outdoorsy. I played a lot of team sports. Like I competed at kind of national level in like particular sports. And even then it was still quite challenging. So like I do think for someone really to be put themselves in the best possible situation to not only thrive, I mean, but to grow, I think, from that situation and to grow from the experience of joining the military. You would want to have like a decent base level of like physical fitness and at least have an interest, I think, in keeping fit. It is an important aspect that underpins a lot of what the military is and what military operations entail.
Yeah, it's definitely important. Like, I remember going in, I was only 17 when I was in recruit training, and like I was like, I think I spoke on about another podcast, so I was only like 50 kilos, and like at dinner time the corporate was saying you need to get another dinner into you kind of thing. So they do kind of build you up as well,
exactly,
kind of break you down, but physical fitness like is next level.
Yeah, definitely.
Grant, so you're done now with training. You started a class of around 55 and 12 females. Out of the 55 that kind of started, how many finished or made it through the whole 21 months?
I think our attrition rate, it wasn't super high. I think maybe 5 people may have left in over the 21 months for different reasons. They were different ages as well. So some had, I guess, come in as graduates and they just, you know, they had experienced, I guess, like the real world and the outside world, and some just made the decision for them to go a different path. Others then maybe through the physicality, or just realised it wasn't for them, ended up leaving. But I think it wasn't too high. I think there was a good core group that were, you know, I suppose joining for the right reasons. It was the right time in their life, and they stuck it out. We stuck it out.
Okay, brilliant. So you're out cadet training now. You're down to UL then to go to college, because so when you joined the cadets as a school leaver with a leaving cert, then you're sent to college to do a degree.
I went and I trained actually recruits in the 5th Battalion first. So I had a year out of my unit to learn actually how to be an officer. And that was down to the NCOs in Gormanston and County Meath. So I again remember my first day or two landing up in Gormanston to the 5th Battalion, and the CS and the sergeants there, you know, seeing that they had some new blood in the unit, and we were incredibly naive and probably like deers in headlights, walking onto the base, and started training recruits. And I think it wasn't just for me. It wasn't just about me training recruits. It was about me learning how to train recruits, how to interact, how to operate, I think, in this organisation. And all of what I learned was down to the NCOs, both the senior NCOs and the junior NCOs in Gormanston at the time. And I really just have a huge amount of gratitude for the senior NCOs and junior NCOs at the time. And still, I mean, there's still people I would keep in touch with and see regularly. And what I learned, I think, from them was that the command that was vested in you by just virtue of your rank, that will only go so far. I think what they really built up with me was how, when even no one's looking, like how to demonstrate those leadership attributes that I guess a good commander, a good officer in the Irish Defence Forces should have. And that was like doing the right thing even when no one's looking. Showing empathy, always putting troops first, always putting the people that you've been entrusted with the kind of command and leadership responsibilities, always putting them first. And I've tried as hard as I possibly can to kind of maintain that as a principle. Not just during my time in the Defence Forces, but now, like subsequent, and like now that I've left the DF, it's something I really hold like dear to me. And sometimes to my own detriment, and that I will kind of generally try and put others first. And it was an exciting year before I went to college. Learned a huge amount. I mean, the cadets was great for learning, I guess, the theory and learning, you know, like the academic side, and even building up, I guess, like my physical resilience in terms of the physical training. But I think in terms of operating and growing and being a leader in the Defence Forces, I think that first year and then subsequent years in Gormanston and the 5th Battalion really are what I think shaped me then, and things shaped me on areas that I still feel that I'm still working on.
Do you think there was more pressure on you, like as a female officer, like surrounded by majority men in an organisation?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I joined the 5th Battalion, I was the only female officer at the time. We had 2 female NCOs as well. They weren't up in Gormanston. They were down in McKee. And I, particularly as kind of the training officer for recruits, I was very aware as well. It's, you know, the female officers training the recruits. And I think there's additional pressures placed on you. You're not seen as your own, like you yourself as an individual. I've often found as a female in the military that you are just that. Like I was a female officer. I wasn't an officer. And I think there was definitely like a bit of additional expectations placed on you. I think if you made a mistake, it was like amplified, and it was a mistake as a female officer, nearly that you were shouldering that mistake for all females in the Defence Forces, and you had to answer for all females in the Defence Forces. So I definitely felt that additional responsibility. I felt I bore more my mistakes, maybe more as a result. You know, while others male officers, for example, might have just, you know, they're young lieutenant, they're first lieutenant, these things happen. I definitely felt additional responsibilities on my shoulder to not mess up, and to try and ensure maybe people that some people maybe that didn't think it was the infantry particularly was a career option for a woman. I definitely didn't want to feed into maybe some of those harmful stereotypes, or feed into that narrative, and try and did everything within my power to counter that where I could. And it definitely put me under additional pressures.
Fair enough. Grant. And then she's done the degree then in UL then after you're in the 5th Battalion, and then you're overseas then to the Leb.
Soon after I finished college, I did a 4-year degree course, studied law and French in UL, and used to come back every summer, and like university holidays as well, to the unit, which was great. So I continued to kind of train recruits during those summers. And then I had the opportunity, my battalion actually reorganised. So we had a reorg just at the end of my final year in college, and the 5th Battalion and the 2nd Battalion amalgamated. Very sensitive at the time. We would have been, I don't want to say enemies, but it was
frenemies.
Frenemies. So we amalgamated, and I went overseas as a platoon commander with the 7th Battalion then. Honestly, one of the best experiences of my life. I got to work with a platoon sergeant who's still serving, who really just taught me how to operate overseas. Was a fantastic leader, a fantastic mentor, a fantastic guide. We had fantastic NCOs as well, who again had lots of experience in Lebanon. We had a number of quite young people as well in the platoon, but a really lovely mix of people. And one of the unique things about serving in Lebanon at the time is that the platoon, we got to spend quite a lot of time on our own on an outpost, so we weren't just in the main camp. And that taught us how to live in very, very close proximity and close quarters with each other, and to get into a routine, and again to like work on our empathy and like work on our skills and drills, and really like, I guess, solidify those bonds and those ties that we had.
As a platoon commander, you're in charge of 30 troops?
There was 33 at the time. So we had a few APC commanders, like our armoured personnel carriers, with us as well. So brought it up to 33. So like day-to-day operations, we would have been doing a lot of patrolling. Like we would have been out in the communities conducting engagements. We would have been working on like the security for like some of the logistic patrols going up to Beirut, and then working really on that outpost in terms of geographically keeping a particular area safe and secure as well, and making sure our outpost was, you know, the day-to-day running of it was kept going, and it was busy, but a really just a really rewarding, I think, mission. Definitely.
Obviously, it can be rewarding and challenging, I suppose.
And I think it depends on what stage of your life you're at as well. Like at the time, I was engaged at the time, and my husband, my fiance, again, he was serving, so he understood. He I think when I deployed overseas, if you went back the previous 24 months, we'd spent about 18 of it apart. Before our wedding. So he had a number of overseas deployments. Yeah. This was my first one. But I didn't have any pressure on me. Like, there was no one, what are you doing? Where are you, like, when will you be home? Like, there was none of that. Yeah. And again, it's only now that I guess we're married and like we have a little girl. I now see how difficult it must be if you have like children or if you are caring for maybe relatives. When you're overseas, there's a lot of additional demands. I felt very free to enjoy the experience, learn from the experience overseas because I was able to fully immerse myself in it. Yeah. But that's not the case for everyone, and there's significant sacrifice from on so many like levels, from either the person staying back home or the person staying overseas, depending on your family circumstances. Yeah. And I think that's something that's really just, I guess, been brought home to me in recent years since leaving the army.
Yeah, there's almost like a support network behind the soldier. Like every soldier nearly has like a whole team of support
completely
behind them. Yeah, so
and I now know from being on the other side, it is 10 times harder to stay at home.
Than overseas.
Yeah, before my husband left the Defence Forces, he was in Mali during COVID, so he couldn't go home. And I was pregnant at the time. For the entire time he was over there, we were in full lockdown at home. And I remember saying, like, it's the people at home deserve the medals.
Yeah.
Like, and that was me without children. I know lots of people that have 2, 3, 4, 5 children that, have kept everything running at home. When you're overseas, there's a lot that's kind of taken care of.
Yeah.
Like, it's structured, you're fed. Yeah. You only really have to mind like yourself and like do the work and like make sure your troops are safe and secure and everything like that. But those day-to-day family commitments that are actually probably the most challenging, that's all left to one person back home. So it's definitely cemented for me that the people that are at home deserve the medals coming back. Yeah. It's, different missions are different, but it's something I'm very conscious of now.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Grant, so you're home then from overseas, you're home from Lebanon, and then you're out to Canada then with the Peace Support Operations School, is it? Yeah, so I decided when it kind of started actually just before the 5th Battalion reorged. I got into this whole area, of gender in the military. And it was actually as a result of me being the only female officer in the battalion that nearly the perception would be, something has come up with gender in the military. Yeah.
That's send Deirdre. So I definitely benefited from, I think, like some of the bias and stereotyping there was around what that meant. I don't think anyone really at the time knew what it meant. And I started to, I went over to Sweden first and I got myself trained up and qualified as a military gender advisor. Oh, okay. And then with the Irish Defence Forces, started building on that through like human rights courses, CIMIC courses, which is essentially like civil military coordination, civil military cooperation, how we interact with each other in the operational environment. So how the military interacts with civilians, with NGOs, with IOs, with the national security infrastructure. Yeah. And I was like, this is really, really interesting. I want to do more in this space. And it took my kind of infantry training to this other level. It became like more detailed, more nuanced. So I had an opportunity then to get like further qualified over in Canada, and over the next few years I ended up going back on kind of 3 occasions for extended periods to be an instructor with the Peace Support Training Centre in Canada. And then I got opportunities to work with the UN and NATO on gender and human security over the next few years, and I brought all of that back to the United Nations Training School in the Curragh.
Okay.
And we started running like international courses on protection of civilians. We started just building up our course profile. We started to deliver these like more nuanced, I guess, military trainings to our personnel deploying overseas. And I absolutely loved the UN school. It was amazing. It was a whole new world for me, and really took all those experiences and brought it all together. And I really enjoyed being an instructor, a lecturer, course facilitator, and I really enjoyed interacting with like so many international militaries, but also like at home here in Ireland, like Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as it was at the time, now DFA, NGOs, IOs, even like private businesses as well that were kind of interested in, like our common security picture. Like it was no longer seen as, security is just the remit of the military. We started to understand that actually we're all parts of like, there's interdependent parts here, and like we need to have a more comprehensive, holistic approach to the contemporary security environment. And I thought that was amazing. For me, that was like the pinnacle of my Defence Forces career.
You got to then implement it then in the Congo, was it?
Yeah. So I fast forward a few years, and my last deployment just before I left the Defence Forces was to the Congo, and the Congo is where I always wanted to serve. I think if I went back to that 8, 9, 10-year-old, it was the Congo I kind of saw myself in even at that age. Yeah. I remember reading stories of like the Irish Defence Forces there in the 60s, and Jadaville and everything, and going, wow, like that's what I imagined overseas would be like. So when the opportunity came up to deploy, I jumped at it, and I was lucky while I was deploying out there as a psychological and information operations officer in the headquarters. The gender advisor appointment was actually empty at the time. The UK had a kind of a gap in their deployments. So I got to fulfill it, and I was the gender advisor to the force commander. And again, it brought in all of those elements for so long that I'd been kind of working on and interested in, and got to implement then in that overseas environment, and it was amazing. Yeah.
What does like a gender advisor do in an overseas operations environment?
So the military and gender can be a bit of a complicated space, but for example, in the Congo, like what you're looking at is a better understanding of the operational environment. So traditionally militaries would have looked at, and like this is actually great for even like modern day businesses and stuff like that. So you would have just looked at the battlefield in terms of like the enemy forces, friendly forces, and nearly as if you're operating on this planet that only the enemy and friendly forces exist. What that disregards is how complex the operational environment is, all of the different actors there, and the needs of the people, I guess, as well. So it's taking a much more population-centric view to the operational environment, and it's breaking down the operational environment into like different parts. So sex, age, and gender is kind of one aspect. So it's just understanding the people, their needs, that the security threats affecting men and women are going to be very different. The security threats affecting girls and boys of different ages would be really different as well. If you're a young male in like the central region of Mali who's maybe 11 or 12, like one of your major security threats is maybe being recruited as a child soldier. If you're a young girl of the same age, like one of the biggest security threats affecting you is either being trafficked for sexual purposes, or early forced marriage, or indeed like sexual exploitation and abuse, conflict-related sexual gender-based violence. So it's understanding that and then building a better, more robust security operation around those specific needs. So the Congo, for example, the area I was in was known as the rape capital of the world. So sexual gender-based violence was endemic. It was everywhere, and not just against women and girls, but men and boys as well. And one of the things that we were mandated to do as a force was protect civilians. And we were actually mandated to proactively protect civilians. We could use force out there. So it was quite a unique peacekeeping mission that we got to use. We got to conduct offensive operations. And we were essentially warfighting with the brigade known as the Force Intervention Brigade. And a lot of it was off this protection of civilians principle that was enshrined in the mandate. So for me, it was amazing because it wasn't... Gender sometimes was seen as maybe gender in the military, maybe a nice to have. Deirdre, if you've got time, we could maybe build in some of these considerations, and we can start looking at the environment and start looking at the specific security needs. In the Congo, it was central to what we were doing. It was like central to the military mission, so I didn't have to sell it. And that for me was just hugely rewarding. It gave a huge amount of scope to bring in a lot of the learnings, and a lot of where different initiatives had failed over the years as well, in Afghanistan, in Syria, historically in the Congo as well. And we're trying to learn the lessons of the past as well and really implement them, and bring into our current operations. So it was, I guess, like a smarter way to conduct our operations, and a smarter way to do business, I think, as well for the UN.
And does that then, are you then trying to educate the population and like implement change then, or implement like a behavioural?
So and a lot of what I was involved in then was just that, like, influence operations. So you're using a combination of like engagement opportunities, like strategic comms, to change behaviour. So if you just take sexual gender-based violence, we want to prevent if we can. So that's like plan A, or preempt. If we can't prevent, and where we have failed in those, like provide an appropriate response, and a better response than we've had traditionally and historically when it comes to rape being used as a weapon of war. So they were the areas I was focused in on, really. It was like the prevention of rape, the prevention of sexual gender-based violence, then the preemption of it, making sure our forces were equipped with the knowledge where they did, if they did come across this, or if an allegation was made, or we had a mass rape in a village or a town, and then what response we had to have in place there then as well. So that might have been taking maybe offensive operation around against the perpetrators, or it might have been around justice seeking and ensuring like report mechanisms were robust, making sure people had an opportunity to access justice, and that we were working with the government there. It was, don't get me wrong, it was hugely challenging. There was a huge amount of gaps there, I think, both with the UN mission but also on the national side. I think the Congo is one of the most beautiful, most stunning countries I've ever been to. But the challenges are vast. The challenges really are huge. And I feel like there's a lot of entities working kind of against each other in the country. But for me as a captain going over, and having the opportunity to work at the force headquarters level, and to influence these operations, to actually go out and conduct operations myself, that is going to be something I'm going to take with me, and the learnings I'm going to take with me for life. Yeah,
brilliant. And obviously got to influence like real change and see it take place as well. So it's brilliant. So, and now you're an instructor with the UK Ministry of Defence on their human trafficking security course, is that right? Yeah, so I suppose some of the areas that I've gotten involved in, and stayed involved in, I guess, is the human security gender side. So I still instruct on the human security advisors course with the UK Defence Academy in Shrivenham. We just had our most recent iteration of the course last week. And I love that. I like staying in touch with the military gender and human security side of things. I also work as a gender advisor and chair for the World Health Innovation Summit, where we're looking to progress the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I work with Gareth Presh, who's the CEO there, on just that, progressing UN SDG 5 on health, and I feed in the kind of, I guess, the gender perspective there, and have been working with our National Veterans Organisation as well as a board member and gender advisor, for a few different reasons. One, I absolutely love the scope and the mission of the ONE, but also we're looking to, I guess, continue to progress our diversity and inclusion strategy as well, to message to women that have served in the Irish Defence Forces and indeed other militaries that find themselves in Ireland, that, you know, we recognise your service, we celebrate your service, we want you to become full and equitable members of our organisation, because I think traditionally when women maybe have left, they haven't necessarily joined the veterans organisations. So we're trying to change that, and we have. I mean, we've had great success over the last few years, and it's been an incredible team effort. But you know, we still have a lot more to do. And the ONE has been just hugely fulfilling as well, and just getting to work with other veterans and meet other veterans as well has been amazing. So I think a lot of what I've learned through the work on the human security and gender side,
I've brought it through to my now civilian career, and not just in like the NGO, IO, like lecturing side, but even into my day-to-day work. It's just having, I guess, looking at things maybe a little bit different, recognizing that diversity and inclusion aren't, nice to haves. They're like essential to haves. And we need to be doing everything as individuals to continue to progress what we can.
Yeah, definitely. And you've got some like real life experience that you can kind of bring and implement.
Totally. And that makes a difference.
Yeah. And how long are you out of the military now?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah,
okay.
3 years. And it's flown.
Yeah.
It really has gone so fast. My husband's been out about a year, so we're both, pretty socialised now.
Civilian household now.
Yeah. And it's funny, but it in some ways, I didn't think, like he did over 20 years, I didn't think it would take us, this long to maybe re-socialise maybe back into civilian life, but it definitely has. In a lovely way. Like we're still trying to we still maintain a lot of contact with our friends and former colleagues, and a lot of our really close friends would either still serve or have served.
Okay.
But I think what's taken maybe a bit of getting used to is no longer having like a 6-month break from each other. Okay. Which is, but
still go on holidays on your own.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe, I don't know how we'd engineer that now, but it is an interesting, kind of dynamic when we had been used to, one person being overseas every, year or two. Yeah. But it's been great. It's just a bit different.
How did you find the whole transition from like soldier to civilian?
I remember feeling really guilty.
Yeah.
I knew when I got back from the Congo that I was going to be leaving. And I before I even had found a job, I actually said it to my commanding officer at the time. He was the general officer commanding the Defence Forces Training Centre. Okay. And I was told not to say it to him. I was like, everyone, they were like, Deirdre, the army doesn't need to know, like keep it to yourself. And I said, no, like I actually want to be honest, that I've come back from overseas and something has changed. I want to do something different. And I also don't want to commit myself to something I won't be able to follow through. I think that was the biggest thing for me. Okay. So when I came back and I had a kind of a staff officer's appointment in the Curragh, I sat down with the general on my first day, and I was like, sir, I've decided I'm going to leave. I don't have a job yet, but I just want you to know because it probably, hopefully will happen in the next few months. Yeah. And I want you to know because I know you're putting my name against, certain things, and there's certain initiatives that you want to get done and progress. I don't know if I'll be here to see them through. Okay. And when I said that to him, it kind of made it a little bit more, like it made it real.
Yeah, it's happening.
It wasn't just something I was like, threatening or kind of saying to, my husband or my friends. And that actually felt like a little bit of a weight had lifted off my shoulders because I did feel so guilty. The army isn't a job. It's like a calling. And when you're in, you feel part of something bigger. You feel something like there's something greater than just you as an individual. Like you're a team of people. You're an army. Yeah. So I think that was like the first step in trying to reconcile that feeling of guilt. And then I was like applying for jobs, and I was really doubting myself as well because I was reading these job descriptions. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have any skills. There's nothing here that I could possibly bring to the private sector. I'm never going to find a job. How do I...
Did you know what you wanted to do?
No, not really at all.
Did you leave then before having a job kind of lined up, or did you have a job?
No, I waited till I had a job lined up. So what I started to focus in on was less on like the job titles and more on like those skills that it said it wanted. So I tried to focus in on some of the skills I thought I had around like coordination, communication. I didn't feel like because I don't know if it was because I studied law in college, or I found it hard to package everything I'd done in the army, but I actually found it really difficult to try and package what do I do? Who am I? What do I do? Like what role could I possibly go for? Like I'm not an engineer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a solicitor. What am I? And that became really hard to figure out. So but then when I started focusing in on the like transferable skills, it made it a little bit easier then to navigate, just to navigate different opportunities that I saw. So I didn't limit myself to any one sector, any one geographical area. I just looked at the skills, and I was lucky. I was successful after like my first kind of round of interviews. But I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. Like I didn't really know what the job was. It was
It's Milestone, was it?
Yeah, with Milestone Technologies, and it was as a strategic business partner. And I was like, well, security is like something I know of. I like doing like strategy and operational planning. I went to UCD and I did one of the exec courses there on like strategy. So I was like, I don't really know what the job is, but it feels like I could at least give it a go. And it was in the technology sector, and it wasn't something I traditionally thought of myself going into, because I don't consider myself techie. If I look at my computer or my phone, like it immediately breaks. And I just didn't feel like I had an aptitude. But what I didn't realize was the diversity in terms of roles and role profiles within the tech sector, particularly here in Ireland, and how lucky we are, and like what a myriad of like just opportunities. Maybe not at this point in time, but certainly 3 years ago. And very much like the military, that you could go into an organization like that, and there's so many pathways, roles, opportunities. So I went into something pretty familiar around like security and strategy and planning. And there's a large like comms engagement aspect to the scope to the job, and got to know the tech sector, and I loved it. I was like, oh, this isn't as scary as I thought it would be. And I tried to just embrace it. And I was the only one out of my team working in Europe. So I had to work a lot on US hours. That was a little bit of a change. I put a huge amount of pressure on myself for like the first few months as well, like wanting to impress, like wanting to show like, you know, you made a good choice, like with the army. One thing I did realize, and I'm glad, because I do see other people struggle, is that I didn't feel, some people are really married like to their rank, and when you leave the Defence Forces, it's not your rank anymore. I wasn't Captain Carbery, I was just Deirdre, and no one cared what I did or didn't do. And you're really exposed, and you're exposed. For me, I embraced that. Like, it was, okay, I'm going to have to bring my personality here. And I'm going to have to like demonstrate that I have the skills and aptitude for this role without relying or hiding behind either a uniform or a rank. And that works for some people, but it doesn't work for others. I have seen plenty of people not comfortable with that they were very tied to their rank and maybe mistaking their leadership abilities and their aptitude with that of their rank, where no one ever questioned them, or no one ever said no.
Did you find that transition from, let's say, military leader into kind of civilian manager difficult?
I don't think so, because I don't know if I was like your stereotypical military leader. So I was always me, even when I was in uniform. And I think that was something I wanted to be like. This maybe sounds a bit silly, but like my authentic self. So I was my authentic self. And my authentic self when I was in the military wasn't for everyone. Like, people would have said like, well, you have to be a little bit more military, or Deirdre, like maybe don't be so much of you.
Way too friendly.
Exactly. And like would have got that a little bit, I think, in terms of feedback. But that has only been a positive, I think, now that I've transitioned over to civilian life, and I don't feel like I've changed, and I'd still meet like my military, colleagues and friends, and I haven't changed. I don't think I've changed at all, and I want to keep that. I do think it is important, because I do think your authenticity as a leader is something really, really important. Like, I don't know if I can curse, but like people like smell bullshit like a mile away, and as a military leader, it's really obvious when you're putting on an act or a role, or you're embodying who you think you should be. And it generally is like this cartoonish character of like someone in uniform, and like your voice goes deeper and you only bark commands. And I just don't think I I don't think it gets you far. It might get you far in the short term, but like I think in the long term, like people respond to who you are as a person and how you treat people, and I think your authentic self is what needs to be brought through there.
Yeah. I think like there's a difference, right? So like when you first joined the army, how you're managed is a lot different to like day-to-day life. When you're at that kind of training environment, it's everyone's like way more friendlier, and it's on like
true.
You're called by your rank and your second line when you're in trouble kind of thing.
Yeah.
But not necessarily on like a day-to-day basis. Like you still have to like, interact with people. So. But
I think what you're saying is actually really important, because some people are able to distinguish those environments, and I do think in the training environment you have to be that little bit more like abrupt, be less of your personality. And I can imagine when I was training recruits, I wasn't like who I am now, and I had maybe a different persona. When you're out publicly in front of a group of people. But I think then it's knowing how to differentiate those environments and kind of adapting, and some can and some can't. And I think then when you come out, particularly to the tech sector, it's a very like flat structure, and that can be a little bit jarring, I think, for some people as well. Particularly, I suppose it's not too bad for me as a captain. It wasn't that I had, any kind of like high rank in the Defence Forces. But I'm sure if you're coming out and you did hold a particular rank, and you had, maybe staff officers, and you had people doing a lot of things for you, I'm sure that can be a bit jarring as well. And when it's just you, and you have to engage at all levels. Some people thrive in that environment, and then maybe others, it's not going to be as comfortable for them to thrive.
So you're in Google now at the moment.
Yes.
As the D&I manager, is it?
So I'm in Trust and Safety. I'm Trust and Safety Manager for EMEA.
And how's that going?
Love it. Yeah. Again, like an incredible team, incredible organisation, impactful work. It is aligned with my principles and values. And again, all of those, we talk about real world experiences and real life experiences. Like I've taken everything over the last, nearly 18, 19 years of my like professional career, and like continue to learn every day. Don't get me wrong, but I'm bringing all those experiences through. I don't believe, if it wasn't for the Defence Forces, like I don't believe I would be where I am, or I don't believe I would be, being able to make the impact and kind of working in the role that I'm working on.
It's probably like the perfect job for you now. Like with
it brings together everything. Yeah, it's like people management side, policy side, working on like the crisis management side. So it really is. It brings together all of those. So I look back then at all of those experiences from overseas to Canada and lecturing and gender and human security. I'm working in different staff roles and realizing, okay, all of those we're building to something. Like I think this role will, continue to enhance like skills and, give me new experiences as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And the Defence Forces then as a whole, would you recommend it as a career option?
Definitely. I do think, particularly for like a young person in Ireland today, and this might be a bit controversial, but I do actually believe that military experience is good for everyone. And I'd love for more people to get a taste of it, I guess. The way maybe some other countries do. If you take like Finland or Switzerland, for example. I don't think it's going to happen in Ireland, but I could see some benefits. I think of myself as an 18-year-old, and just, I guess in hindsight, like how little I knew about the world, or just, I guess, not knowing just how far you can kind of push yourself as an individual. Like the military takes you out of your comfort zone in what should be a very supportive, well-managed environment. And if it's not, then, and I do think there has been cases in the recent past that have shone a less than adequate light on the Defence Forces. But if you can, get that supportive, structured environment and go through your military socialization in that environment, I do think it's like incredible skills for any young person to have and bring through their career. And I say that coming out of the back of like a pandemic where the world kind of was turned upside down for people.
Yeah.
I did see, I guess, across Ireland and across a number of sectors and organisations, people have really struggled. And I think one of the things, certainly me and my like ex-Defence Forces pals and, you know, Army veterans have seen is like we found ourselves very adaptable. Yeah. We found ourselves in a really privileged position where we felt, you know, we felt that we had, I guess, the resilience to draw on to operate at a time of like unprecedented uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I feel personally like I only got that through my Defence Forces experience and my military training. I don't see where else I could have gotten that. Yeah. And it meant then at times where, you know, a team wants you to lead or to navigate or to guide, you know, others through. Yeah. I found that, you know, veterans have been very much relied upon to, you know, bring people through that. Yeah. And to be those leaders and be those guides. And I think that's something really special as well. Yeah, it's something I'd love to see more people consider as a career option.
Yeah, I'm probably like on the fence. I don't know if it's for everyone, because I think like when I trained, I started at like a high number, and I think like it was like high 20s passed out kind of thing. So it's not for everyone.
Agree. Yeah.
Mentally, you have to want it. More. And you have to be physically robust and mentally robust. But yeah, we'll see what happens over the next few years.
I think the Defence Forces nowadays and the military is like offering something, I think that's totally at odds with what like modern society is offering people.
Yeah.
Like it's all about the self at the moment. Like it's the selfie. It's, you know, putting yourself first. It's like your needs. And I get that. Like there has to be a balance there. But what the Army is offering you is something a little bit bigger than that. And it means actually you as an individual taking for a time just a little bit of a back seat and focusing more on the group and the needs of the group. Or like, you know, maybe your national interests and your national needs. That's very, very different, I think, to what's available out there now. Yeah. And I think to maybe for people to consider a career, like what can we do to entice people in? For me, it would be, you know, the sense of adventure, the challenge, the opportunity to work in these really incredible countries and make a difference. Yeah. And doing something bigger than the self, bigger than something than you as an individual. Yeah,
it's definitely. Yeah, we'll see what happens, I suppose. But yeah, look, it's definitely a good career option if you want it. So yeah, we'll see what it costs. But I think that wraps it up.
Amazing. Yeah.